Welcome to our webinar, a feasibility forum on industrial heat decarbonization. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Monet Koons. I am an associate on the Climate Aligned Industries Initiative at RMI. During this webinar, feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can during the live Q&A. So we'll get started, and I'll pass it over to Christina, who will share some background information on this project.
Great, thank you, Monet, and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on industrial heat decarbonization projects. My name is Christina. I'm a manager on RMI's Climate Aligned Industries team. And just for a little bit of context for all the great insights you're about to hear, decarbonizing industrial heat is a critical lever for decarbonizing industry overall, with the potential to reduce US emissions by 2 to 5% just with currently available technologies and more as the sector develops. However, the sector has been slow to lift off despite the availability of advanced technological solutions. With the gracious support of the Schmidt Family Foundation, the RMI team has spent the last 6 months meeting with technology providers, EPC firms, investors, industry associations, and potential industrial clients to understand the barriers and bottlenecks that are preventing widespread adoption of industrial decarb technologies. And just a huge thank you to all the individuals that lent us their time and expertise for this effort. So in a moment, my colleagues are going to present our insights on executing first-of-a-kind projects and business models. So I just want to note that these insights were primarily developed with 2 technologies in mind, those being industrial heat pumps and thermal batteries, though we believe that many of our findings will be applicable to a broader suite of technologies in this space. In addition to our panelists, you'll be hearing from 2 members of the RMI team today, Monet Koons and Ankur Das, who have spent the last 6 months refining these insights. And also just a shout out to Kelly Wu, who was critical to making this webinar possible, but has recently left RMI to start her PhD at MIT. So we hope she's in the audience to see how her hard work has paid off. And without further ado, I will pass it back to Monet to get us started.
Thanks, Christina. So for today's agenda, we'll be sharing some key findings from our work, followed by a panel discussion, and then wrapping up with a live Q&A session. But before we dive in, we want to hear from you. Emily, can you launch that first poll question? We want to know, what role do you play in the industrial heat ecosystem? And we'll give you just about 30 seconds to answer this question. Okay, here's our results. Looks like we have a wide range of folks in the room, a lot of energy service company or consultants, a few industrial customers, some financiers, a lot of NGO and government organization folks, and a few others. So thanks so much. So now I will pass it over to Ankur to share some key findings from our team on executing successful first-of-a-kind projects and emerging business models.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Monet. Emily, could you please launch the second poll? I'll be sharing with you guys just some of the keys to success to executing first-of-a-kind industrial heat projects, as learned from the folks that are involved in these projects today. The first is that tech providers play a pivotal role in creating demand, but they need a strong support system to execute successful projects. Next is that the relationship between the technology provider and the customer must be collaborative, and success hinges on finding a project champion, clarifying the customer priorities, and designing solutions tailored to their needs. And also engaging with educating the right decision makers at the right stage of the project is essential. Next, accurate site evaluations, including a thorough assessment of the integration complexity and particularly balance of system costs, is critical to de-risking the project upfront. Next, a well-defined project scope through field assessments and early stage high-value engineering maximizes the chances of on-time, on-budget delivery of these projects. Next, strong oversight of projects through steering committees and rigorous contractor vetting keeps the project on track, ensuring that the right team is engaged at the right time, executing the right scope. And then finally, carefully crafted contracts that strike a fine balance between managing risks while allowing for flexibility that folk projects need are critical. And in that vein, heat as a service agreements are becoming increasingly popular. So let's take a quick look. Emily, if you could close the poll, let's see what the audience thinks about the top challenges. Okay, there we go. So a lot of votes for creating demand and building customer relationships, managing site evaluations, estimates, and integration costs is ranked pretty high. Securing financing and managing financial risk is also quite high. And then identifying and engaging key decision makers at the customer facility. Those kind of round out the top 4 choices. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Monet, to introduce our panelists.
Great, thanks, Ankur. So for today's panel, I'm thrilled to be joined by Blaine Collison from the Renewable Thermal Collaborative, Arun Gupta from Skyven Technologies, and Edward Hernandez from Genesis Americas. To kick things off, could each of you introduce yourself, share a little bit about your work, and share from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenge in scaling first-of-a-kind industrial heat decarbonization projects today? Blaine, let's start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Great to have this conversation. So I'm Blaine Collison. I'm the executive director of the Renewable Thermal Collaborative. The RTC is an initiative co-convened by the World Wildlife Fund, the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and David Gardner and Associates, where I work. We are a global coalition centered around large thermal energy users, mostly global manufacturers, who are all trying to figure out, well, how do I decarbonize scope 1, right? How do I decarbonize my process heat or the heat I'm using in my portfolios of buildings? Our stakeholders. So I'm here, frankly, to probably give a bunch of voice to what we hear from buyers, right? Who are the ones they've got net zero targets or science-based targets, and they're trying to figure out, well, all right, well, so we're going there. Now what? How do we actually do this? What technologies, in what order, in which facilities? How are we paying for this again? How do we do all this while building and enhancing the business, right? So it's really interesting work that's trying to optimize, leverage, markets, policy, community of practice, technology to get from here to there.
All right. And did you mention what you see as the biggest challenge?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry. Complexity. I mean, it would be easy to say the money, right? Gas prices are too low, and it's worth talking about that. But the sheer put that aside for just a minute, because even if that goes away, you still have amazing problems of complexity, right? Because you're making stuff all over the world, and making chocolate is a little different than making petrochemicals, but you need heat for all this stuff, right? And so it's if you think about the renewable electricity experience, right? We can build wind and solar gigawatts at a time. We can also do rooftop stuff, but we can go gigawatts at a time. Decarbonizing thermal, right? And Arun and Edward can talk at length about this, right? You're having to go into a plant and touch stuff. You're going line by line, right? You're probably changing technology, or at least changing the means of production. It's the units of change are slower, and I'll come back to this later, but it can be a very bespoke exercise, which means it takes forever and a day, and it's expensive. So, figuring out the approaches that get us to scale, I think is the big challenge. Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
No worries. Thanks so much. I'll pass it over to Arun.
Thanks, Monet. Hi, everyone. My name is Arun Gupta, and I'm the founder and CEO at Skyven Technologies. We at Skyven are an energy as a service company, and we are working to scale the deployment of a proprietary steam generating heat pump technology called Arcturus at manufacturing facilities worldwide across a variety of industries: chemicals, pulp and paper, food and beverage, ethanol, metals, textiles. So it's pretty wide, pretty wide application space. And then we, as an energy as a service company, we have a business model where we deploy this technology on site. We bring the money, and we sign long-term agreements with the manufacturing facilities where they buy the steam generated by the system. And generally, we price that steam at or below the existing cost of steam. So it's a no CapEx plus OpEx savings play. That's at least that's always our goal. Now, whether or not we can achieve that for every customer is something that we're constantly working to improve. Let's see. So the question, biggest challenge for scaling first of a kind projects. My answer on this is going to be pretty similar to Blaine's. I would characterize it as the uncertainty, and in particular, not knowing what you don't know. So when it's first of a kind and it's never been done before, you just don't know what the challenges are always. And the unexpected can sort of pop up and get you. And it's really the unexpected in finance, or the unexpected and you find something hidden underground, or like there's really a really broad scope of monsters hiding in the closet. And that's what makes it so hard.
Awesome. And Edward, we'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Edward Hernandez. I'm the managing director for Genesis in the Americas. Genesis is the business line for arm of Technip Energies, which is a global technology product services company, as well as a major delivery company of projects primarily in the energy sector, but across various industrial sectors. I have about 35 years in the industry, starting out doing a lot of engineering and project work. About half of my career has been on the project side, the other half on commercial and business management. What we do here at Genesis is get involved, in across upstream, midstream, downstream in the early stages of projects development. But we are very heavily involved in the sustainable energy space, and especially with decarbonizing both existing facilities and looking at new ways, new facilities to create offtake that include decarbonization and a lot of carbon capture and sequestration projects. So what we do a lot of is early screening, techno-economic evaluations, looking at NPV and IRR as a basis for new developments. And we find challenges all around. I think from my perspective, the biggest challenge that we see is just not really bringing the end to the front end, and not understanding the back end, and really, getting specific with geographical challenges, with in-plant challenges, and understanding what that means in cost. Also, just misalignment with business models and not understanding the overall objective of what's happening with a particular initiative, right? How the business is going to work, where the offtake is going to be, what all the synergies that have to take place, the time that's involved, the permitting that's involved. There's so many things that go into that big picture. And sometimes the siloed approach doesn't really work that well. So there's quite a bit of challenges. I think, it's obvious that the biggest challenge is economics How do you make these projects economic? Is that offtake? Is it credits? Are you making something? How do you pay for these types of initiatives? That's the biggest one, and what better understanding what that capital investment looks like, and how to phase it, right, and how to right size it. Those are all big challenges that we deal with all the time in the studies that we're doing.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel, it's easy to sometimes point to all the challenges, right? And so I'd love to spin this a little bit and ask Blaine our first question about, can you share a success story where industry collaborations like at the Renewable Thermal Collaborative have helped drive demand for decarbonized industrial heat? And then to add on, what role do you think that these collaborations play in accelerating the transition?
I love this question, and I should be able to answer this certainly within 90 minutes. That should be easy. The RTC exists because a group of half a dozen large thermal energy users said, "Listen, we've been working on the renewable electricity thing, and we get it. We got a plan, and we've been innovating and collaborating, but we actually don't know what to do about the heat side. We don't know how to solve for natural gas, and we're all having to confront this. So could we get in a room together and start to use some of the approaches, the knowledge sharing approaches and innovation approaches that we've all collectively used on the electricity side, and start to work this problem?" That seemed like a really good idea. And so, here we are, what, 7 years later, and the RTC is more than 100 organizations, from around the world, working these problems. And we engage both the demand side and then the solutions provider side. Arun and I get to chat a fair amount, because Skyven is part of the RTC, and we actually have these technology providers engaged at the request of the buy side, right? They have explicitly said, "Look, there's a whole bunch of innovation happening." I have windows behind me. There's a whole bunch of innovation happening out there in the world. We need to hear from these smart people, right? We need to hear from the solutions providers to understand what our options are and how to actually deploy stuff. So we see this all the time, right? This is part of the bread and butter of the RTC, is convening these sets of stakeholders together so they can hear from each other, say something smart, and you go off in the corner and start to talk about pilot projects. It's amazing. We've seen multiple commercial relationships come out of the RTC. We are a pre-commercial space, right? So we don't get involved that deeply, but we see these partnerships and projects emerging from these conversations. And I think the DOE's recent Office of Clean Energy Demonstration Awards are a fantastic example of this potential, right? What happens when you put the demand side and the solution side together, and provide some support, right? Part of the magic of the OSET Awards is that it wasn't just a straight subsidy, right? It was a cost share, right? Designed to buy down that initial experience and set of learnings, so that we support projects 1 through 5, so that 6 through 55 can just go, right? Because we will have accumulated that knowledge and early experience. That's amazing, right? And if you look at the winners, including Skyven, the cost share match from the solution was amazing, right? They were looking for 1 for 1. I think they got 2 for 1, 2 plus 2 for 1. So there are examples all over the place, in fact, which is really exciting.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Arun, you've been directly involved with quite a few first of a kind projects. What's been your biggest learning about, forging these strong relationships with the industrial customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a lot of it has to do with kind of like 3 things. There's risk, responsiveness, and then providing the whole package solution. So on risk, for a provider providing a first of a kind project to decarbonize industrial heat, just doing the project alone involves risk for the manufacturing facility. and so the provider really needs to step up and take on a brunt of the, like, the project risks. And I think that really helps get first of a kind projects over the line and helps build the right relationship. You can't, it's impossible for a provider to take on 100% of the risk because we're decarbonizing, as Blaine mentioned, an actual facility. You got to touch that facility to decarbonize it. But there's lots of things that providers can help with, and that's really important. So that's around risk, and then responsiveness is that for first of a kind, like the whole Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. Like things are going to go wrong, and it's really important to be responsive, and responsive at the highest levels, and that really helps. It shouldn't be an expectation of things going perfectly should not be set. Things will go wrong, and when they go wrong, the project team, both the manufacturing facility and the providers really need to come together to solve it. And when that happens, then we solve those issues and are able to move forward.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Edward, as someone who works in the engineering and implementation side, Arun mentioned that connection with the project team and the on-site folks. Can you talk a little bit more about what you've seen in that space when it comes to either collaborations or overcoming these pitfalls in your space?
Yeah, silos, too many of them. I think, stakeholder alignment is key, right? And you're talking about alignment in an existing plant with the operations superintendent, the people that run the plant. But then you also have budget holders for decarbonization that don't even sit anywhere close to them. And then you have their senior executives, and then you have financiers, all working differently, and really having that transparency across the stakeholders, managing the stakeholders' interests, and giving them a roadmap to what the plan is. Not necessarily so much of an emphasis on the technology and the the specifics, but what's the roadmap? How are they going to get there? What's the timing look like? What has to be done first? What permits need to be petitioned for? There's a lot that goes into any type of brownfield initiative. But what I see is a disconnect all the time is from the main office to the operations, right? These guys have different value drivers, and getting them to align on a common initiative, and explaining to them why it's good for them. That's the thing that we face all the time as engineers, and sometimes engineers don't know they're working in a silo, right? So it's hard for them to act on behalf of the other players, right? So it's something that I think needs to be, for these types of initiatives, there needs to be more of a clear roadmap for everyone to see, in my opinion. And that stakeholder alignment is really the main message. Identifying them as well. In many cases, you haven't identified who the stakeholders are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think I'll follow up with another question for you.
Sure.
Talking about that effective oversight and collaboration, between your contractors, making sure you don't have these silos. What do you think emerges in a successful project for that key area?
You mean what emerges out of the disconnection, or what's?
Well, how do you have a successful project knowing that these silos can emerge?
Oh, I think you need to develop early stage project management system, steering committees, routine meetings, alignment meetings, that is, and you have to do a lot of the early stage conceptual work, and not just have an idea, right? So and what I mean by that is the conceptual work to actually execute the project. And like I was saying before, bringing that knowledge of constructability and, supply chain, installation, logistics, that knowledge into the very front end permitting, which takes forever. Those are the kind of things that you need to be, they need to be very much involved in the early front end. That's why having a project management consultancy or owner's engineering, we do that. We do those services. And that's something that adds value quite a bit in that stakeholder alignment.
I would build out on that and say one approach that we at Skyven have taken that we found to be effective is, I mentioned providing the whole package. And so when you have a single party that's providing the financing and hiring folks like Edward to provide, the initial, consultation in the work, and then hiring, picking the equipment and actually, signing the POs for the equipment, and then writing the, construction contracts on their paper. When it's a single party, then that party can kind of manage the finger pointing of like when things go wrong, like, oh, it was their fault, or oh no, it was their fault. If that party is really motivated to make the project successful, then that can help shield that sort of stuff from the manufacturing facility, because manufacturing facilities oftentimes don't have the bandwidth to kind of manage that kind of stuff, especially for first of a kind product. I mean, that sort of stuff is going to happen often in capital projects, but when you're doing first of a kind, the risk of that kind of stuff goes up, and it can be mitigated by having one party kind of manage everything.
Yeah, that makes me think, how do you, and this might be either a question for all of you or a question for Blaine, how do you align these diverse stakeholders if you have, not a vertical aligned project, tech providers, your customers, your policymakers on the key priorities for the project, whether that's financial to the customer or a payback period or just overall, how do you align for these first of a kind project?
It's a bear. And Edward and Arun are both describing some of the challenges and some of the best practices, right? A multi-silo, multi-seat collaborative project team formed from the outset, right? Because the operations is going to have a slightly different value driver or set of concerns than engineering, than the plant manager, than the corporate sustainability side, right? Who's reporting emissions up. Get that group engaged. Look, the people that are typically sort of charged with this are in a tough spot, right? A company, well, here's our science-based target, hooray, and someone down in the energy management or utility or sustainability silo gets a call that says, congratulations, you're the person. You get no new budget, no new hours in the day, no new staff. Don't mess it up. Don't hurt production, and off you pop. And we're looking forward to seeing the plan. And actually, the next quarterly meeting's in 89 days. So we'll, right. And it's a lot of variables. So back to where I started and what Edward was saying. And we've written a case study with AstraZeneca, one of our members, that really highlighted the value for them of pulling together the project team at the outset with the technology partner. And as Arun said, stuff happens. So you catch it early, you work it, you sort it, and you keep going. Bring the team.
Yeah, thanks so much. It makes me, we mentioned something about getting it early and getting with the project team early. And now we have our project team, we have our collaboration. Arun, I'm curious, how do you balance the needs for the early and accurate site evaluations and scoping with the inherent uncertainties of first of a kind?
Yeah, that's a good question. Given that my response about uncertainty being the biggest challenge. I think it's a process of addressing the biggest risks and shedding light on the biggest uncertainties first. and then kind of narrowing down the funnel. So if in the first months of the project and the first, small percentage of budget spend, the biggest risks of like, hey, is there enough electricity on site, or is this going to affect production? Like Blaine mentioned, bring in the ops stakeholders and run the plan by them so that you don't get 30% through the budget, then all of a sudden someone throws up a red flag and says, hey, I'm not going to allow this. This messes up my production. It's going to cause a production excursion. It's a hard no. And then everyone that creates a lot of a lot of discontent. So really addressing those big risks first, and then later on you can spend the big money on the detailed engineering and getting all the pipe supports correct and all that good stuff. I think that's probably the best approach. So like like the common industry term is using a stage gate approach. We're big fans of that.
Thank you. Yeah. And Edward, it makes me think, coming into your space in the engineering, what advice would you give these technology providers to better integrate their solutions into industrial and existing systems?
Yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of that that stage gate approach that Arun mentioned, and doing the right things at each stage, and I think before you get to the conceptualization of the project that you're trying to implement, there needs to be when we talk about these stakeholders, especially operations guys, it's how do they win? What's in it for them? And how do you clearly illustrate that their KPIs will benefit from what you have in mind, and how do you mitigate the risks and prioritize the risks and illustrate that early on before you go to the next decision gate, so that we have that alignment and buy-in on the onset, and you don't have to go back and forth and back and forth. I think that's the kind of thing I've seen where I've seen success. It's been really getting operations involved early, and doing the preliminary engineering work to where you can illustrate the value add to that operation, to that P&L, right? Because in many cases, it has nothing to do with the overall objective of the customer that may have multiple plants, right? It's how do you get these guys excited that their facility, and how does it not only benefit them from a KPI standpoint, but also illustrate the value that it's providing overall to the world, right? And how they can be with a first of a kind pioneering in some respect. That's my take on it.
Yeah. Do you find that there's a lot of in-house engineering that the industrial customers do, or do you find that it's or do you do it, or is it a large collaboration between the two?
That's a good point. I think, I mentioned the word silo before. I think that goes from operations as well. I think there's a lot of great stuff happening in different parts of the globe that we're not taking advantage of in many cases, because a lot of the operators want to do things in-house. They don't want to disclose if they have a great idea. They don't want to share that great idea. And the beauty of being an international engineering firm is that you have projects going on in Europe, you have projects going on in Australia and Asia and different parts of the world that may have already done this. So it may not be such a first of a kind, right? In the sense that, the studies have been done, right? So how do you leverage that? I think there needs to be more transparency, and that open dialogue with service providers that may have been involved in similar facilities in other parts of the world or other parts of the US. So it's going to take a collaborative effort. You can't just do it individually, as an industry is what I mean. So I think that we can definitely get better there.
Great point. Blaine, did you have something to add?
I love all of that answer, Edward. So part of the, again, so part of the reason for being for the RTC is, in fact, so the operations and engineering and utility and sustainability people from these global 500s, global 1500s can come into a space and say, so listen, we did a project in Benelux or France or Georgia or Australia.
Right.
Here's what we learned. Here's what was great. Here's what was maybe a little less than totally great, but here's what we learned, right? And that may be one of the crowning values of the RTC is providing the space for peers to find each other and share, and then to have service providers say, oh, well, yeah, and actually here's the other thing you should know, and it's a force accelerator, right? And it's amazing to watch it happen, and to watch the collaboration and see curves starting to bend up as a result.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you make a great point that, across the world, there's different policies and different market specifics. And so I think maybe changing that a little bit from a policy or market perspective, what do you think what services or products can OEMs and their partners offer to make it easier for industrial customers to adopt these renewable thermal technologies?
I love this question, and it's a chance for me to sort of channel my members, and part of what we keep hearing from them. Financing, of course, right? We got to get out of the CapEx thing, and I think Arun can talk about that. Right. So as a service agreements, right now, these engagements, and Edward and Arun are both talking about this. They're pretty bespoke engagements, and in some ways that's reflective of just the sheer physical complexity of it all. But the companies, part of what they would like is a way of reducing that bespoke complexity every single time, right? And the ultimate manifestation of that might be, well, we need 3 package A's here and 3 option C's here, and okay, so maybe we don't get quite there. But right now, the problem looks pretty flat to an energy manager or engineer, right? There's this basket of renewable thermal technologies, and some of the questions: heat pumps, thermal storage, solar thermal, waste heat recovery, efficiency, decarbonized molecules, right? I mean, there's a set of things, and I think a lot of buyers are in the position of knowing that they're going to need. It's a yes and proposition, right? They're going to need a bunch of heat pumps. They're going to need a bunch of solar thermal and thermal storage and right? And so they're trying to understand again, well, so which things go where, in what order, and in what ratio, right? Do we need 3 of A and 4 of B? Do we right? Are we going to do all of something? And if you have to do a full-blown engineering analysis every single time, for every single line and every single plant, that's going to take an awfully long time, right? So part of what the supply and service side and OEM side can do is help provide some of that guidance, right? Because it's not, the buyers don't want to be sold on the specific widget right out of the right. It's not about the widget. It's about the solution. The widget may be part of the solution, but they've got to get line of sight to what the portfolio solution is, and then where the widgets fit in. That's relatively straightforward.
Yeah, it's a great point. Arun, it makes me think about how Skyven Technologies is pioneering in that heat as a service space. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, but maybe first, can you just explain what heat as a service means, and then how do you see this model addressing these financial barriers in industrial customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, heat as a service means that we install projects on site at manufacturing facilities, and in particular, Skyven does steam generating heat pump projects. And rather than charging capital, rather than being a CapEx bill for it, we use third-party project finance to cover the capital costs of the project. And then we sign long-term offtake contracts with the manufacturing facility, where the manufacturing facility is compensating for actual performance of the project. So actual emissions reduced or actual renewable heat provided to the facility. And so it's a nice model because it aligns incentives. So the more carbon savings and the more fuel savings that the project provides, the more money the provider makes. And so both the manufacturing facility wins because they're getting what they want, and the provider wins because they're making more money. And then vice versa. It's a great model because if something goes wrong, the project underperforms, then the provider is literally getting paid less. And that's so important for motivating the provider to fix whatever the heck is wrong. Because under the traditional CapEx model, which has, persisted for centuries and is very, very familiar to most manufacturing facilities, the problem with that is that the manufacturing facility takes on all the risk of the project. And so if the project underperforms, then it's really the manufacturing facility that ends up, having overpaid or having to chase someone down. And even if there are guarantees on performance, it's still the manufacturing facility that has to chase someone down to enforce a guarantee, which is pretty hard. Versus, in an energy as a service deal, the provider is just getting paid less. And so they're self-motivated to fix the problem. And it is so powerful because I will tell you, maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but I'm going to say it anyway because why not? As a business leader in an energy as a service company, there have been problems that I would like to just say like, it's not our priority right now, like leave it. But it's hitting my bottom line. I can't say that because if I just leave it, we're bringing in less revenue. And as a business leader, like, I'm bottom line driven as any others. And so like we have to go and fix it. And so I have seen firsthand how it motivates our company and even me as a leader to go and make sure that these projects really are performing the best that they can, and that we fix any issues and optimize it and get the most out of it.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, so I have one question for all the panelists before we move into our live Q&A. And so we'll start with Edward on this question, but the question is, how do you see the industrial heat decarbonization sector evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think it's going to grow, obviously. I think, right sizing these projects is important, right? And I'm very optimistic, obviously, as we try to have more renewable heat and renewable everything. That's not going to change. Geopolitics aren't going to affect that. That's going to be a major driver. I will say, and this kind of pertains to what Arun was saying, is that we see a lot of success where offtake is involved in the investment, right? And what you mentioned was somewhat of like a boom T type arrangement or a boot arrangement, a toll type investment for the operator or the plant. I think you'll see a lot more of those different commercial strategies because we've seen them work, right? We've seen them hit FID where you have considerable investment from off-takers. I think that's what it's going to take. A conventional method of, putting all the risk on the operator is just not going to really work. And people are proud of their technologies. They have to stand behind them. That means invest in these projects, right? I think there could be a lot more awareness between consulting and engineering and who's out there as we develop contracting strategies and philosophies. Who can provide finance, who can provide equity investment. All of those things are really important to help shape the overall project. But I'm very optimistic. From what we're seeing, there's not really a slowdown in the renewable sector. And decarbonization, I think, is something that's here to stay in the U.S. for sure. And we're seeing mega projects with decarbonization as well. So I'm very optimistic, and that's something strategically that we're very focused on.
Thank you. Arun, I'll pass it to you. What do you see changing or evolving in the next 5 to 10 years for this sector?
I think it's scale. To me, it's scale. I think we have started, in that exponential curve where we're starting to work our way up to the knee in the curve, and I think in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to hit that knee, and this space is going to go gangbusters. There's so much demand for it. And as the risk starts to come down that spectrum, as we get these first of a kind projects done, and second and third, then all of a sudden it's like, hey, look, this has been done before. The risk profile is known, and then it's just a financial decision, like, hey, how much money am I going to make? How much money? The not knowing what you don't know goes away, and it's a straight financial decision. And those decisions are a lot easier to make. And it's really clear, like, hey, this geography pencils today, this geography doesn't. We're going to get there, and we're going to get there in the next 5 to 10 years.
Blaine.
What they said. But one of the things that was really important on the U.S. renewable electricity space was third-party capital markets understanding wind and solar as an asset class, right? As a commodity asset class, and understanding the value of, a counterparty like GM or Microsoft or Google, right? Investment grade credit, or the counterparties signing long-term offtake agreements. That was transformative. And I mean, we're dealing with that same class of customers here, and I think what we're going to see here is an increasing commoditization of industrial decarb, because heat pumps are killer, right? It's fantastic tech. Thermal batteries are amazing tech. Modern industrial solar thermal is killer. These are understandable assets and deployments. So, we're going to deploy a lot of all that stuff, and we're going to scale this thing in a way that is required, by the way, and that's going to be pretty compelling.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll move into our live Q&A section now. We have a few questions coming in, and I think just for the sake of time, let's try and answer in 1 to 2 sentences. Okay. So the first question is for Blaine, and the question is, given the objective of reduction of Scope 1 emissions, how do industrial customers value of a Scope 1 emission reduction on $1 per CO2 ton? Does the internal carbon price or reporting on 10Q IFRS result in simpler project decisions?
So how do they do it? It varies. And for companies that do actually assign a value to carbon, or to non-decarbonization, right? Assign a value to business as usual. Yes, it can make project decisions much easier.
All right. Thanks so much. This next question is for Arun and Edward. So we'll start with Arun. What regulatory barriers, if any, have you observed at different project phases? From a global perspective, how do different policy environments affect project plans or outcomes?
Yeah, our projects, because we don't generate electricity, we generate heat. We've not really run into major regulatory hurdles. Like sometimes the city can take a while to to issue a building permit, and that's annoying and needs to be planned for. But I wouldn't call it a major hurdle. And so and we don't have any. There are no chemicals involved. Like our heat pump has water as its only refrigerant. So we don't need, our environmental permitting is super light. So we haven't really run into regulatory hurdles, but I would say regulatory accelerators, things like like performance-based incentives can really help accelerate things.
Thank you. And Edward?
Yeah, I'll just add that, for thermal heat, it's not really a major issue. A lot of the permitting is very localized. It's just an awareness of what permits need to be in place. I think when you get into carbon capture, moving CO2, that's where we see that's a different space that involves a ton of regulatory challenges, especially crossing different lands where land has to be acquired, and then FERC, moving across state lines, things like that. So pipeline is more of a major issue. So that's why it's important to understand the overall complexity of the project. What's involved. If it's just very localized, it's pretty easy. But if it's part of something bigger, that could really delay your project, right? So.
Thank you. The next question is for Arun. In the Skyven model, electricity costs are critical so that to that of low-cost renewable steam. How are electricity costs handled in the agreement between the operator and Skyven?
Ooh, great question. Yeah, thanks for asking that. So for one, that's correct. Electricity costs are crucial. So the way we do it at Skyven is under our agreements, Skyven is responsible for procuring the electricity, and we actually in our systems set up a separate drop from the transmission line. We build our own mini substation just to power the heat pump. And so we are really a separate independent service, electrical service from the plant and are billed separately. And that really allows us to procure electricity separately. And then what we do is, so the thing that is not well understood, because everyone gets a fixed price, I pay 9 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever on their home electric bills. It's not well understood that electricity operates on a supply and demand basis, where the supply and demand is reassessed every 5 or 15 minutes. So it's very much a real-time supply and demand market. That means that electricity prices in real time can change dramatically. They can go from negative to crazy expensive. And so what we do at Skyven is, because our heat pumps are fully redundant with another steam generation system, oftentimes it's the existing boilers in the plant, that allows us to be real-time responsive to changing electricity prices. Whereas electricity prices go up or down, we can turn our heat pump on or off and revert back to the existing boilers as necessary. And that allows us to manage electricity costs very, very effectively. And so that's it. The end effect for the manufacturing facility is that they're basically guaranteed the lowest price steam at all times, whether electricity in a heat pump is cheaper or an existing fossil fuel fired boiler is cheaper. They're always getting the cheapest steam.
Thank you. This next question is for Edward and Arun as well. We'll start with Edward, but are there common technical needs in equipment or components or specific areas of expertise that would help with projects across the board, or is every project challenging in its own way?
Well, I think, no two projects are the same in my experience, but obviously we like to take advantage of similarities. In fact, that's why FOAKs are more expensive in engineering, is because there's no go-bys, right? But replication is a really big thing. Understanding, I think the actual technical knowledge applies, can apply across all different plants. But I think what we try to do is create a wrapped solution, right? That's that you can replicate with very little increase in or decrease in overall price, TIC. But replication is something that we always aim for in all of the industrial sectors we play in. But there's a lot enough like, in terms of equipment, standardization that we can use. And I think standardization is a big part of what we do in any type of installation.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And in fact, at Skyven, we have created a standard heat pump design that we're able to customize for individual manufacturing facility needs, while keeping it inside the same product line with all the same library of components. And so we're able to generate custom designs using the same supply chain, the same components, and the same engineering as we did, in an ethanol plant and a pulp and paper plant. And so then the only thing that really changes then is the integration of waste heat into the facility. And even then, pulp and paper plant 1 and pulp and paper plant 2, while they can look very different, the integration is quite similar, and we're able to take learnings and reapply them, as Edward mentioned.
Thank you. Okay, I think this might be getting close to our last question. And this question is for everyone. So I asked to keep it short to maybe one sentence. But and we'll start with Blaine on this one, what are the unique prospects and challenges of scaling up renewable heat in emerging economies, excuse me?
Oh, probably adequate, reliable, clean electricity supply, right? Because emerging economies probably don't have gas infrastructure, right? Which is an opportunity. So you need enough renewables. It's got to be reliable. So you're going to grow demand a bunch. If you're switching from a coal-fired industrial sector, this is not one sentence, to an electrified one, you're going to need a lot of clean power.
I can go next. I'm going to go in a different direction. I think it's credit worthiness of off-takers in developing nations, or having a credit-worthy entity kind of step in and say, hey, I'm going to provide like essentially a guarantee on this to make these projects financeable.
For me, it's quite simple: the cost of the clean power.
All right.
Sometimes unattainable.
Thanks so much, everyone, for all your questions. And I'm sorry we could not get to all of the questions, but we'll have our contact information up here. So if you have any follow-up, you can reach out to us. Thanks again so much for joining us today. Feasibility Forum on Industrial Heat Decarbonization. We're really thrilled to share this important work with you. And please note that this session has been recorded. And so both the full recording and our published blogs from this work will be available on the event page within 24 hours. You can access everything through the QR code here on your screen, or by visiting the same page that you used to register. And once again, if you have any follow-up questions or want to reach out to our panelists, feel free. And thanks again, and have a wonderful day.